Hi, how's everyone doing? I like interactive. That's why I talk. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's been a long day, I imagine, and everyone's a little probably information fatigued. I'm going to try to do my best to keep things kind of simple and short, and I want to talk a little bit today about a strategic playbook and large-scale Linux migrations using AlmaLinux. To go forward with this, I just want to do more of a highlight overview. It's not going to be very a technical deep dive. It's going to talk about kind of what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to approach AlmaLinux when we were transitioning from CentOS 7 to AlmaLinux, and kind of go through that. Kind of a little bit of what we talked in the last session. There's a lot of reasons why we chose AlmaLinux. It's one of the things I mentioned was the fact that we saw the progression of how quickly AlmaLinux was able to fix things, to see things. The community has been great, and so we had a lot of reasons to jump and go with you guys. So when it gets down to this idea and motion of setting up a strategic playbook, we need to talk about what that means. To tell you a little bit about it, as you know, my name is Stephen Winters. I'm the director of IT over here in Cinesite for North America. But Cinesite itself, we're 10 companies, and we're global. So we have companies in Germany, London, Macedonia, Mumbai, Vancouver, Montreal, a little small subset in LA, Los Angeles. And so we're widely known. We have a lot of sister studios, but we do have a core group. So 5 of those studios kind of operate really tight-knit. And what I mean by that is that we have what's called the Cinesite pipeline. And the Cinesite pipeline is we're kind of sharing the same code base. So what that means, though, is why we share the same code base. Before we moved to AlmaLinux, we all were still independent studios. So at the time, I was overseeing the Cinesite Montreal. We had someone overseeing the Cinesite Vancouver. We had someone overseeing Trickster. We had someone overseeing Cinesite London. Now, we're going to do a transition, and everyone has established their studios at different times. Some was 20 years, some was 10 years, some was 5 years. Had independent heads of IT. We all had a little bit different at how we worked for that studio. The studio I worked for at the time was Cinesite Montreal. We were a visual effects and an animation studio. So we had 2 separate pipelines dedicated for both divisions, whereas some of the other studios did visual effects and some of the other studios did animation. It was very different. When we decided to do that, we had to essentially go through this mindset of we now want to standardize completely. We really want to bring in these studios to having the same packages, the same operating system. Everything was done the same way. So for us, thank you, we kind of had to come through with the process of coming up with what was called a plan. Yes, I know. This sounds very simple. And everyone of you guys are probably saying, I know what this means. I know how to do a OS deployment. But the truth is that a plan was a little different for us. For us to set up a plan, we had to actually do an objective. And we were trying to set what we want to do. What did that mean? When you have 5 studios that all has different levels of RPM packages, and we want to actually wipe all those RPM packages and start from scratch, we have to think about what the history for every package was at every studio and what they were using for what tool they were. We had to evaluate every tool that was maybe unique to that studio to determine, does that tool still need to exist? We had to think about the desktop editor. There was many studios that had different DEs. We were thinking about what we wanted to do. We had to go through a bigger process, and from this, we want to have an objective that was, how do we get a studios that were formed or bought or acquired and bring them and bridge them together to be more unified and have a standardization? So we had to come up with a plan, and with any plan, we always have to actually come up with someone to own it. So for us, when we did this large-scale deployment, we actually had a point person. The point person was the one that was actually going to be accountable for overseeing all of these studios in the North America and in Europe. We wanted to make sure that they would be accountable for talking to all the departments, the pipeline, our IT folks, and all of the areas, and also meeting with our artists and productions to make sure that the deployment and the scale and the transition would happen. Now, from that, the reason why we did this, and for small scale or large scale people, businesses, for us it was important because we really wanted to find someone who can know what to test, when to test it, and how to test it, and talk to those people. We needed someone that would kind of shield us, from the white noise. there was going to be a lot of people talking, and we really wanted one way for them to actually be communicated to. So they were the people that they went to, and then they went to the heads of IT to talk to us about what was going on. They were also the canary in the coal mine, in the sense of they were always hearing if there was complaints or challenges or problems or things that were breaking, that were bugs that we needed to fix and we needed to patch. And from there, they would kind of push that back to us, and we would actually action it appropriately. And this person would have time to check in with every department. This person wasn't super technical, but it was personable. It had empathetic abilities and skill sets, because it was going to be working with people that knew that change was going to happen, and we'll talk about that later in this session. But they were very, very tight in terms of their communication. Now, the plan was pretty simple, because we had a goal and objective of what we wanted to do. But the plan was just a high-level objective. We had to then take into the next level, which was going to be about evaluation. The evaluation itself is different. Most people like to equate plans and evaluations and executions kind of being the same, but they're not. The way I actually define it is that a plan is actually the idea of having goals and objectives, whereas evaluating is assessing the effectiveness of the plan. So it's a little bit different. And again, this all seems very simple, but it is extremely complicated when you have a bunch of studios that you're trying to go through. We had to actually think about the idea of building Alma, making sure that it was the right fit for us, make sure all of our main packages would work. We had to build it with the notion that we were removing all of the RPM packages and go back from square one with our studio to make sure that we weren't going to break anything else in our pipeline code. We had various applications that were going on that required time and testing with our dev teams. We also had to think about the idea that we had workstations, and in the visual effects and animations side of things, we also have what's called a render farm. So we wanted to make sure that it would work when rendering and sending packages to the render farm. We also had to think about the phased approach. When you have 4 studios, all with different production cycles, different teams, different organizations were at different times, how were we going to actually have the challenge of actually getting to the point where everything's been tested and then officially rolled out to all of the productions? We had to also think about our critical services. A lot of people get to the workstations and the render farm, which in my opinion is a long process, but it is also the easiest. But the critical services are the most difficult. They're most apt to risk and bringing down all your studios. So we had to think about how we were going to do that, when we were going to do that, and what was going to take to actually do those critical services. We had to think about spare workstations. We wanted to minimize our disruption. So if someone had an AlmaLinux system and something was not working, they can easily revert back to their CentOS system so they can keep working while we would fix the bug. All these things had to take into account the evaluation, how we're going to do this large scale. And for us, it's the idea of not an easy thing. That's why we wanted to make sure that we assessed the plan and how feasible it was. How many people in this room have cords at home? I have cords from the 2000s. I swear I still think I'm going to need a red, white, and yellow cord. I think if you talk to any IT folk, we probably have hardware from the 2000s because we think sometime we're going to get a new editor that's going to need some system, or we're going to need some kind of hardware that's going to put up a true NAS. We are pack rats. We are pack rats. We are one cable short of being on an episode of Hoarders. That's how bad we are. Imagine the fact that you wanted to tell your IT team that we were scrapping all of the RPMs and we were going to be one set of standard RPM packages. We like our technical debt, right? That's not an easy challenge. So it is a challenge not only to try to tell a studio that you want to move, it's also telling your team that loves to make sure not to touch anything because it may break, that you want to touch something. So with that assessment, it is about talking about these things, having an open conversation with your team, making sure that you can be evaluated, and it can be evaluated right. And it also meant about having the right team, because it wasn't just about having yourself and what you want to do with that point person that I've talked about in the plan, but it's also about having those stakeholders and those supporters. If your IT teams don't get behind what you want to accomplish, if your pipeline team doesn't get behind what you want to accomplish, if your productions don't get behind what you're trying to do, it is going to be a hard technical project. So it's finding that right team, finding the people that are going to be champions and advocating on what you're trying to do, being able to help you answer the questions when you're not there and people are questioning the decisions and why you're wanting to do what you want to do. So finding that right team, is always about having people that have time to test the OS. They're semi-technical, where they can explain issues, and when the issues happen, they know what's going on. They understand the new deployment and the changes that it's going to bring. They have a concept of why you want to do what you want to do. And we knew, and our IT team knew as well. But that's one of the aspects of your evaluation that you want to do. You want to have that team. And so we go through that idea of having an evaluated plan, stakeholders, knowing the needs of the studio, the timeline, and then we go into the next phase of execution. And what I mean by execution, it means just we're going forward with a plan. Now, for some people and for some personalities, this is the next challenge that you guys run into. How many people run into a challenge where maybe your IT folks or maybe people get really frustrated or discouraged because you have a plan, but the plan doesn't always go according to plan? You have something set, and then there's a bump, and you have to shift and change. Or there's a challenge that run into it, and it takes a little bit longer than normal to get that fix. And you go, why did we not think about this when we were originally setting up our plan? And the truth is, and this is what we try to educate at Cinesight with our teams, is that when it comes to a plan, it's going to ever evolve. Evaluation doesn't mean it stops in the planning stage. It's a constant happening throughout the execution process. You're constantly reevaluating what's going on. I've talked to our team before where there is a strategy in military in the United States called OODA loop. And OODA loop stands for basically observe, orient, decide, act. And so there's a lot of leadership books that always talk about this idea of OODA loop. And the concept of it is that no plan is always going to be flawless. It's going to go according to what you want to be. You have to be okay and comfortable and relish in the fact that these bumps are okay. You observe, and if you need to orient yourself, you decide where you need to go because new information has come. You've decided what that new information is, what you need to change, and you act on it. And that's the one thing that we're constantly doing when we're doing an OS rollout. Our OS rollout from CentOS 7 to Alma 9 took a full year. We're just now finishing also this month our critical services because we had 200 plus critical services, and we wanted to make sure we took the time each time to go one by one and make sure we didn't actually disrupt the facility. So when we talk about this idea, being okay with the idea that the plan you set in motion with those objectives could change, that in the evaluation, that the bumps or the bugs or the things that you come across may cause you to have to take a moment, pivot, redirect, and keep going forward. So right now, as we talk about all these things, we talked about the plan, we've talked about the evaluation and execution, but there's a third part. And this is the part where I think a lot of people miss. And most everyone knows how to deploy an OS. Most people knows how to project manage. They know how to plan, they know how to set a timeline. But there's an aspect to a major technical project that sometimes is overlooked, and it's the tact. It's how do you handle the approach of getting someone to want to follow through on the changes that you're wanting to implement. Even our best technical executions will have pushback from our company. And the reason really is because people don't like change. Let me give you an example. Every one of us in this audience will have no problem if they see a desire to get an upgrade on your phone or to upgrade a new software because it has some new feature that you really want. We consciously make the decision that we're going to change something about ourselves that we want, whether it be a hardware device, whether it be a software change. We are consciously, because we know the pros that come through with it, right? What happens when you tell someone that doesn't want to change to change? They don't see the reasons or the benefits that you see in the change. but you're forcing a change that they may not want to because they don't have the same value scale that you have on why that change needs to take place. Change is hard in human behavior unless you're able to use the right and appropriate tack in your change. So, what does that mean? And I had a big joke about how Chrome tabs, like we 10 years ago we had Chrome tabs that no one wanted to do any kind of any updates to your web browsers because they were afraid they were going to lose their tabs because everyone had 100 tabs open. Even today we can cache those, and I still have people that don't want to change their web browsers, but we're getting there. So change is hard. Anyway, what does it have to do? What does this all mean? So basically, I'm ahead of myself. There are a lot of psychological and psychology that we can put into our OS deployments, and a lot of it is centered around, first and foremost, our communication. The way we communicate and the way we go about talking to our users and our user base. So in some ways, like with our testers, the first impressions will really shape exactly how the testing will go. So in the example here, we want to try to avoid overselling or underselling a product, what we're trying to do. So in the example, when we are actually going through and having testers, we're very neutral. I want to frame the neutrality. We don't want to say, hey guys, we want you to try out this awesome new OS. If they don't like it out of the gate, you've already lost their trust. And we don't want to say, hey man, this is a great upgrade to the OS, but there's just one thing you need to be careful with, because that caveat now has already gotten them starting thinking about other things. There's actually a phenomenon called frequency illusion that I have talked to the team about before, where if you focus on something or you talk to someone about something, that their focus could change. So the example I've always used is like scratches on a car. So if someone notices a scratch on the car and they get so fixated on the scratch on the car, before you know it, they'll start to see other scratches on the car. If you point to an issue, they're going to see other issues and other issues. The issues already existed, but they're just now acutely aware of those issues because their brain is telling them about it. If you look it up, it's frequency illusion. It's an awesome idea about human behavior, and I think there's a lot to be given in terms of how we actually use our language when we're trying to do OS upgrades. Encouraging independent and thorough testing. And what I mean by that is really trying to make sure that in our testing, we really don't try to get them in the beginning talking to others. Let them do an actual test and then report back. Try to avoid getting into a group and go, hey, what was your thoughts? Because they'll start feeding off each other, and then what you might find is actually not as accurate as you want. Empowering the testers to be critical and objective. And what I mean is specifically around that is basically giving specific examples. So how many times do we have where we've had testers and they go, it just feels slow? Be objective. Find your testers that are willing to give kind of data that supports what the issues are going on. In short, really what we want to try to do is let them be advocates of making the OS transition a success. Now, we've done with the testing, we talked about communication there, but what happens actually when we have people actually in the rollout stage? We've rolled out to more people, and now we get complaints. And complaints can be the death of us. Because we'll get things like, Alma feels slow, or I would expect the application to run faster. I can't tell you how many times, not necessarily Alma, but where we've done patch releases, and someone says, or we do something that's an upgrade, and they go, this feels slow. What does slow mean? There's a lot of things that we'll start to hear, and if you're not careful, people will start talking to their colleagues, and colleagues will talk to colleagues. Before you know it, then you've had this outbreak of people feeling like the experience is bad before you even get to the whole studio rolled out. So you got to be very acutely aware, and this is where that point person is coming really, really as being an integral part of this process. Him doing check-ins with the team that are currently going on, he's going to be the person looking out for that particular point. He wants to be the one that knows, hey, we're hearing them talking about this little thing. Okay, we need to jump on that. We need to make sure that we're able to address and see what's going on before it starts to become a widespread thought. We want to validate if it's a real issue, and if not, we want to show and articulate to the user why it is not. So with these things, I always try to be rule number one. We're never going to convince someone that what they feel is wrong. You're not. Just not. And dismissing someone's feelings will never move the issue towards a solution. And then relationship is a key in building the trust. And what I mean by that is that the people that are your stakeholders, your advocates, those are the relationships that you really want to strategically keep on, because they're the ones that are behind the scenes when they are working with their teams, when they're working with the productions, when they're working with their developers, are the ones that are advocating for you and your project. Without them, you are a voice that cannot be heard. They're only hearing their colleagues. So we are trying to be constantly thinking about that and making sure that those relationships are kept. When dealing with perceived IT issues, even if they're not objectively real, we want to basically apply that psychology approach. We want to basically acknowledge and validate that they have a problem. We don't want to dismiss it. We don't want to convince them that they're wrong. But we do want to investigate. And any little issue that we ran into, our team always investigated. We always investigated, even if it was small and minute. And we always went back to, if we thought that it was an invalid, we would sit down and actually talk to the individual or to the group, articulating why we thought it was not actually, what led us to believe that this is not really a big issue. The worst thing we ever do is ignore someone's concern, so we always are trying to validate it. We always want to validate that their voices are being heard and that we do care about the disruption they feel, even if it's small. So from that's one aspect in terms of the communication. But we also talk about the transparency of building trust. We are always being very transparent about what we're doing, when we're doing it. We're always talking about the idea that we're moving on to this next section. We actually have sent studio-wide emails saying we're moving on to this new show or this new production. They're being upgraded right now. We're having a lot of success. We actually took a time to communicate and celebrate fixes and wins. Hey, we found an issue and it's been addressed. So it also validated the fact that problems do come up, but we saw it, we understood, and we fixed it. It only further invalidated the fact that if they have an issue, to come talk to us, and that we don't just take it for granted. Communicate, communicate, communicate. This is the thing that I'm always going to remind people to do. This is what we're always doing. Every time we've always had a struggle or a bump in the road and a failure where we're starting to see frustration, it's because our communication was lacking. Our communication was lacking in some way. We weren't communicating, or we weren't taking serious the communication that was coming to us. So we always try to evaluate that from that perspective. And so for all this, the idea of a plan and then an evaluation and execution is just part of the deployment, especially when you have multiple businesses and multiple entities to deal with. You have to think about also the tact and the changes that are going to be, people are going to be changed. So what do I mean when I get to the end of my topic? I try to come up with something catchy. I thought a pet project made sense. It's fit. So next time you're doing a pet project, maybe an OS upgrade, just think of this in mind. Think about there's a plan, you have an objective, you have a point person. You have an evaluation and execution. So you're finding the right team, those supporters, those advocates, and you're ready to pivot and change when you need to constantly do the evaluation. And then you show tact. Remember, change is hard. We all hate change. Everyone has a perspective. We need to remember that people have a different perspective, and it may be different from ours. And transparency and communication is the key to building trust, and we'll continue to have people be your advocates as you make these changes into the studio. And so this isn't just a technical project, it's a strategic journey. Yes, I know that's a hokey line, but I love it, so I put it in there, and thank you. Questions? No questions are a good thing.
Wow, you did a good job, man.
All right, thank you guys.
All right. All right, thank you everyone. Thank you, Stephen, really amazing. Thank you everyone for attending AlmaLinux Day Vancouver 2025. We were a short crowd, but you were amazing. Thank you for being here. It means a lot to us. To all the team of AlmaLinux, for the people that organized this, including myself. We will be having a cocktail hour with appetizer upstairs in the cafeteria where you're at lunch. It is free. You have tickets. We'll have more tickets for you guys for drinks. And we'll also have the raffle that you had tickets for to win some prizes. So we'll ask you to calmly just go up for this. And thank you very much for attending again. Thank you, and get back safe. See you tomorrow.